Chapter 2 of Pride and Prejudice. Mr. Bennet was among the earliest of those who waited on Mr. Bingley. He had always intended to visit him, though to the last always assuring his wife that he should not go. Until the evening after the visit was paid, she had no knowledge of it. It was then disclosed in the following manner. Observing his second daughter employed in trimming a hat, he suddenly addressed her with, "I hope Mr. Bingley will like it, Lizzie. We are not to know in a way we are not in a way to know what Mr. Bingley likes," said her mother resentfully, "since we are not to visit." "But you forget, mamma," said Elizabeth, "that we shall meet him at assemblies, and that Mrs. Long has promised to introduce him." "I do not believe Mrs. Long will do any such thing. She has two nieces of her own. She is a selfish, hypocritical woman, and I have no opinion of her." "No more have I," said Mr. Bennet, "and I'm glad to find that you do not depend on her serving you." Mrs. Bennet deigned not to make any reply, but unable to contain herself, began scolding one of her daughters. "Don't keep coughing so, Kitty, for heaven's sake, have a little compassion on my nerves. You tear them to pieces." "Kitty has no discretion in her coughs," said her father. "She times them ill." "I do not cough for my own amusement," replied Kitty, fretfully. "When is your next ball to be, Lizzie?" "Tomorrow fortnight." "Ay, so it is," cried her mother, "and Mrs. Long does not come back till the day before, so it will be impossible for her to introduce him, for she will not know him herself." "Then, my dear, you may have the advantage of your friend, and introduce Mr. Bingley to her." "Impossible, Mr. Bennet, impossible! When I am not acquainted with him myself, how can you be so teasing?" "I honour your circumspection. A fortnight's acquaintance is certainly very little. One cannot know what a man really is by the end of a fortnight. But if we do not venture, someone else will. And after all, Mrs. Long and her nieces must stand their chance, and therefore, as she will think it an act of kindness, if you decline the office, I will take it on myself." The girls stared at their father. Mrs. Bennet said only, "Nonsense, nonsense!" "What can be the meaning of that emphatic exclamation?" cried he. "Do you consider the forms of introduction and the stress that is laid on them as nonsense? I cannot quite agree with you there. What say you, Mary? For you are a young lady of deep reflection, I know, and read great books and make extracts." Mary wished to say something sensible, but knew not how. "While Mary is adjusting her ideas," he continued, "let us return to Mr. Bingley." "I am sick of Mr. Bingley," cried his wife. "I am sorry to hear that. But why did you not tell me so before? If I had known as much this morning, I certainly would not have called on him. It is very unlucky, but as I have actually paid the visit, we cannot escape the acquaintance now." The astonishment of the ladies was just what he wished, that of Mrs. Bennet perhaps surpassing the rest, though when the first tumult of joy was over, she began to declare that it was what she had expected all the while. "How good it was in you, my dear Mr. Bennet! But I knew I should persuade you at last. I was sure you loved your girls too well to neglect such an acquaintance. Well, how pleased I am, and it's such a good joke, too, that you should have gone this morning and never said a word about it till now." "Now, Kitty, you may cough as much as you choose," said Mr. Bennet, and as he spoke he left the room, fatigued with the raptures of his wife. "What an excellent father you have, girls," said she, when the door was shut. "I do not know how you will ever make him amends for his kindness. Or me either, for that matter. At our time in life, it is not so pleasant, I can tell you, to be making new acquaintance every day. But for your sakes, we would do anything. Lydia, my love, though you are the youngest, I dare say Mr. Bingley will dance with you at the next ball." "Oh," said Lydia stoutly, "I'm not afraid, for though I am the youngest, I'm the tallest." The rest of the evening was spent in conjecturing how soon he would return Mr. Bennet's visit and determining when they should ask him to dinner. So that was chapter 2. Hi, guys. Oh, look, there's so many of you on here now. Hi, Germany and England and California and Italy. Wow. How many chapters does Pride and Prejudice have, by the way? Let's see. I want to say 60 something. Is it 64? I think 64. I can't find it. Oh, aw, thank you so much for the hearts, guys. So, there are some things I actually took notes now of the things I wanted to say about chapter 2 because, like, last week on chapter 1, I totally froze. So, here are my thoughts on chapter 2. Let me know what you guys are thinking of chapter 2 in the comments here. Okay. So, first of all, in chapter 2, what we see them discussing most are social calls and the building of acquaintances. So, I have two videos where I go very in depth on both of these topics. So, I'm not going to completely rehash it here. One of them is how to meet Mr. Darcy, and that's where I talk about introductions and building acquaintanceships. So, there were a lot of rules around meeting new people. Now, what we see here in Pride and Prejudice is Mr. Bingley just moved into the neighborhood. Right. And this is their chance to go meet him because when a new person moved into the neighborhood, you could go and like introduce yourself to them. This was like one of the only times that was socially acceptable. However, because Mr. Bingley is a single gentleman, Mr. Bennet has to go. If Mr. Bingley had a wife, then Mrs. Bennet could have went and called on that wife. Though again, if he had a wife, that would have like defeated the whole purpose of why Mrs. Bennet wants to meet him so bad. But I go more in depth on the way to meet people and also on social calls on how to meet Mr. Darcy and in my other video of how the Victorian social network. And that's specifically talking about the call that we see Mr. Bennet pay to Mr. Bingley. So if you want to like understand what's going on in like the Regency social world, then definitely go check out those videos. Okay. How are you guys doing in the chat? Aw. Yes, there is so much etiquette happening in Pride and Prejudice, and I think it can be a little bit confusing if you're not familiar with the time period. Could Mrs. Bennet have called on his sisters? That is a great question. I don't think so because Mr. Bingley was the like homeowner, householder per se. His sisters were technically just visiting him. So, that's I think where it gets a little bit iffy there. Also, cha let's see. The other thing I wanted to talk about with chapter 2 is we see Jane Austen's main thing that she loved writing really shine through in chapter 2, which is dialogue. She was a dialogue first writer. When you look at her manuscripts, when she was writing dialogue, it just flowed. There were very little corrections. She just was like in the zone when writing dialogue. It was when she had to write things that were not dialogue that then you would get a lot of like crossing things out, going back and revising it. And if you look at chapter 2, is almost entirely dialogue. There's very, very few sections of it that is not somebody speaking. Now, of course, Jane Austen was a master of dialogue. Not only does she move the plot line forward so much with her characters, but she also builds character from the way they speak. We get a very definite sense of who Mr. Bennet is, who Mrs. Bennet is, and all of their daughters just from how they're interacting. The other thing I wanted to note about this fact that she's a dialogue first writer is we get such little physical description throughout the story. For example, when it says that Elizabeth was trimming a hat, we get no description of this hat, right? Like, is it a big hat? Is it a bonnet? Are there flowers? Is there lace? What is she doing here? We don't get that described. In the next chapter, we're going to meet Mr. Darcy, and we learn that he's tall and handsome. Do we get an in-depth description of what he actually even looks like? No. But she really described a lot of like ideas. And I think that's because she generally dealt in ideas and thinking and internal emotions. And I feel like that really helped her writing be so timeless. Because when we do hear that Mr. Darcy is handsome, if she had went into this really long in detail description of like, this is what Mr. Darcy looks like, she would have been describing what was considered handsome back in the Regency era, which is a standard that has dramatically changed to now, right? So people reading today might be like, well, I don't think that's very handsome. But because we just hear that he's handsome, we can imagine him handsome in our own terms, no matter what era we're reading in. And I think that does add a lot to the timelessness of her books, that she's kind of vague. I think one of the few times in this book, sorry, um, that she goes into such deep description of something is Pemberley. She like describes Pemberley in depth. And I think that's one of the reasons that visual is so central to Pride and Prejudice. It was one of the things that she was actually like, let me tell you about what Pemberley looks like. The other really interesting thing with how dialogue led this chapter is even if you look at all the areas that's not dialogue, it's still talking about communication. For example, in the first paragraph, we see Mr. Bennet is assuring he wants to disclose, he's planning on how to address something, right? Like, even when it's not direct dialogue, she's still talking about talking. Again, later, Mrs. Bennet is scolding someone. Mary wished to say something. Mrs. Bennet then begins to declare, and even at the end of it, they're conjecturing, they're determining, they're going to ask him to dinner. Basically, even when she's not having someone say something, they're planning to say something. Something will be said. And I think it's interesting too that we get so much sense of the characters, such as Kitty being fretful. That's a inherent part of her character throughout the book, but it's just a description of how she says something. Likewise, we hear Lydia being stout. We eventually do get a slightly more in-depth description physically of Lydia, in which she is described again in the terms of stoutness, but we hear that already in being described of how she speaks. I think the most interesting description when it comes to how someone's talking is with Mary, where Mr. Bennet asks Mary, like, what are your thoughts on this? Because she's a deep lady of deep reflection. It says, Mary wished to say something sensible, but knew not how. And I think this is so interesting because it sums up Mary's character, right? She's kind of like a perfectionist. She doesn't know the perfect thing to say here. And so she freezes. But we're getting this entire description of her personality from her communication, or in this case, her lack of ability to communicate something clearly. And so, again, understanding people and how they speak is one of Jane Austen's strengths that we really see come out throughout this chapter. How are you guys doing again? Yes, Jane Austen definitely let people use their imagination with her stories. Aw, you guys are so awesome. Thank you so much. So let me know in the comments down below, like, what is your favorite part of this story? Like, what do you think of all the dialogue? Do you wish that we got more descriptions of Mr. Darcy and the other characters? These are the questions I have for you. Thank you so much for coming to the live stream. And as always, guys, keep being awesome because you're awesome. Bye. Do I even know how to end this? No, maybe I hit the end live stream button.